They handed me a tray of water glasses and told me to serve quietly. No eye contact, no interruptions. I didn't mind. I had come to help, not to be seen, but the laughter started the moment I walked past the VIP table. "Isn't that her?" one of them whispered. "She used to top every exam, now look at her." They chuckled. Someone even snapped a photo. I smiled politely and kept moving. But moments later, the hall fell into stunned silence. The Prime Minister stood, walked straight toward me, and hugged me in front of everyone. Before the story unfolds, tell me in the comments, has anyone ever underestimated you in public? And let us know what country you're watching from. If you're enjoying these powerful real-life, inspired stories of transformation and redemption, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. I never imagined I'd be pouring water at my cousin's wedding. Not because I thought I was above it, but because years ago I had envisioned a completely different life for myself, one filled with respect, achievement, and a seat at the table. But instead, on that rainy Sunday afternoon, I stood quietly in the corner of the glitzy banquet hall, wearing a plain white shirt and black slacks, blending in with the hired catering staff. My tray trembled just slightly in my hand as I walked from table to table, topping off glasses for people who barely noticed I existed, until they did, and when they did, it wasn't out of kindness. I overheard a group of my own relatives whispering behind me. "Isn't that Alina?" one asked. "No way." Another chuckled. "She used to be so smart, remember? What happened to her?" Their laughter was quiet but sharp, like the sound of tearing fabric. I didn't flinch. I'd learned not to, but inside I was fighting the heat rising up my neck. I kept my head down and kept moving. Once upon a time, I was the girl they all pointed to with admiration. Straight, a student debate champion, full scholarship to a top university. I even got invited to speak at a Youth Innovation Summit, where I presented a community project on rural health care that had won regional awards. There was a time when my family would brag about me to their friends. "Our Elena," they'd say, "is going to change the world." And for a while I believed them, but life has a strange way of twisting promises into lessons. After university, I joined a nonprofit that provided health services to underserved communities. It wasn't glamorous, and it definitely didn't pay well, but I felt purposeful. That is, until funding dried up. Suddenly, my contract wasn't renewed. One rejection turned into 5, then 10. At some point, the sparkle in people's eyes when they saw me turned into dull pity. And slowly, families stopped asking what I was working on. They stopped including me altogether. I hadn't been invited to help plan the wedding. I hadn't even received an official invitation. I only heard about it from my younger sister, who had called me in a panic a few days earlier when the catering team backed out last minute. "Can you please help?" she had begged. "They need staff, and I thought maybe it would mean something if you were there." So here I was, wearing the uniform of the forgotten, carrying water to people who once carried my dreams in their praises. The laughter and music blurred into a dull rhythm around me. It was a grand affair. White and gold roses lined the aisles, chandeliers sparkled above, and a live string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner. My cousin Amal looked stunning in her embroidered blush lehenga, smiling from ear to ear. She was always the center of attention, and now more than ever. Her parents, my uncle and aunt, paraded around like royalty, shaking hands with politicians and businesspeople. I kept my distance. It wasn't just that I didn't belong there as a guest. I wasn't wanted there. I knew that when Aunt Nazia walked by me and pretended she didn't see me. I knew it when my uncle whispered something to a waiter and both looked at me, then laughed. I wanted to vanish. Then, while refilling glasses near the head table, I overheard something that clenched my stomach. "She's here." Amal's voice, sharp and incredulous. "You let her work here. I don't want her in my pictures, not today." Someone murmured a quiet apology, but the damage was done. I kept moving, but my chest tightened. How had I gone from the pride of the family to the shadow they wanted to erase? I finished my shift mostly in silence. No one offered a thank you. No one met my eyes. As the speeches began, I retreated to the back of the hall near the service area, folding napkins just to keep busy. The master of ceremonies introduced a few local officials who said kind things about the bride and groom. I barely listened until someone whispered, "Is that him? Wait, he actually came." I looked up. At the grand entrance of the hall, a hush fell over the guests, cameras turned, the string quartet stopped mid-note. A tall man in a sharply tailored navy suit had entered the room. A detail of black suited security formed a perimeter as he walked calmly down the aisle. The Prime Minister. Whispers buzzed like static. No one had expected him to attend. He wasn't on the official guest list, at least not publicly. People straightened up. Suddenly, the laughter died. Phones were pulled out, and the bride's parents looked confused, then delighted. He walked past the rows of tables, scanning the crowd. When he reached the center of the hall, he paused. His eyes didn't settle on the bride, or the groom, or the elite guests waiting with handshakes and forced smiles. He looked toward the back, he looked at me. At first I thought I was imagining it. I stood frozen, still holding a folded napkin in my hand like a shield. He began walking toward me. People followed his gaze and started turning around, confused murmurs rippling through the room. Then he spoke. "There you are," he said warmly, as though greeting an old friend. "You didn't think I'd come without saying hello, did you?" My jaw nearly dropped. The room went still. My heart hammered in my chest. "Alina," he continued, "your work changed the lives of hundreds of families. I've told that story many times, and I never forgot the first health clinic you helped build." I couldn't speak. He stepped closer and opened his arms slightly. I didn't know what else to do, so I walked forward, and then in front of 300 stunned guests, some still mid-bite, some holding wine glasses mid-air. He hugged me genuinely, respectfully. The cameras flashed. Some people gasped. I heard someone whisper, "Wait, who is she?" As we stood there, still embraced in a moment I never saw coming, I realized something that took my breath away. The people in that room may have laughed when I carried water, but I carried something far more powerful all along, and they were about to see it. The moment the Prime Minister embraced me, the energy in the room shifted like a thunderclap. Every eye, once indifferent or mocking, was suddenly locked on me. Even the waitst, if I had stood beside just moments earlier, stepped back slightly, unsure of whether to keep treating me as a server or someone entirely else. I could hear a fork clatter to the floor somewhere behind me. One of Amal's bridesmaids dropped her champagne flute, the stem snapping as it hit the marble. It was as if time had split in two before the hug, and after. I pulled away from the Prime Minister politely, still in disbelief. "I didn't expect you to actually come," I said, my voice low but steady, "let alone remember me." He smiled. "Of course I remember you. You were the girl who built a clinic with 6 volunteers and $3,000 in a town everyone else had forgotten. I didn't just remember you, Alina. I followed your work. I'm the one who put your name forward for that public health fellowship last year." I blinked, stunned. That fellowship had changed everything. It was why I had recently started working as a consultant for the Ministry of Health on a pilot project to digitize rural patient records. It had pulled me out of unemployment and reminded me that my work still mattered. But I'd never known who had advocated for me behind the scenes. "You, that was you?" I asked, nearly breathless. He nodded, then turned to the crowd, lifting a hand like a conductor pausing an orchestra. "I hope you all know who this young woman is. If you don't, you should." He didn't yell, didn't command, but the tone of his voice carried authority that silenced even the room's wealthiest donors. "She represents what real service looks like," he continued. "She's the reason we were able to roll out mobile clinics in underserved areas last winter. When most of us were warm at home, she was on the road, taking medical kits to villages cut off by flooding. People were whispering now, audibly." I saw my aunt, who had snubbed me earlier, now clutching her designer purse in both hands. Why? Dyed and pale, my uncle had leaned in toward the groom's father, clearly asking who I really was. No one had any answers. Amal, still seated at the head table, looked like she'd just been slapped. "I didn't come to give a speech," the Prime Minister said gently. "I just came to say thank you to someone who embodies what this country can be proud of. Someone who doesn't seek recognition but deserves it. Alina, you've done more with less than most do with everything. Never forget that." Then, with one final nod, he turned and left us quietly as he had entered, his security detail flowing around him like shadows. The whole thing lasted less than 3 minutes, but in that time, the wedding transformed from a celebration of two people into a reckoning for an entire family. I stood motionless. The silence behind me became suffocating. Then, like a faucet suddenly turned on, the chatter began again. Only this time it was all about me. Did you know she worked with the Prime Minister? She was on the ministry's rural program. That's government-level access. Why didn't anyone tell us? I stepped back, slipping toward the side hallway to breathe. I didn't want to linger in the spotlight. I had never done this work for applause, and I certainly didn't want to upstage a wedding. I just needed air, but the whispers followed me. People who hadn't even acknowledged my existence minutes ago were now rushing toward me. "Alina, right," one said breathlessly. "I think we were in biology class together in high school." Another woman I barely remembered from a cousin's engagement years ago was suddenly smiling warmly. "I always told people you'd go far. You were too smart to stay small." Their sudden affection felt fake, and I wasn't in the mood to pretend it didn't hurt. I made my way toward the kitchen area where I had left my bag, intending to slip out without making a scene. But the head caterer stopped me. "Is it true?" he asked in hushed tones. "You know the PM personally." "Not exactly personally," I said. "Just professionally. He helped me. I didn't expect this." He nodded. "Do you still want to finish the shift?" I paused. "No," I said softly. "I think I've already done enough." He smiled and patted my shoulder. "For what it's worth, you did this job with more grace than most people I've seen. And you didn't flinch once. That says something." I thanked him and left the building through the side door, feeling the cool evening air against my face. I didn't cry, not yet, but my throat tightened. I wasn't sure what I felt. Relief, vindication, sorrow. Maybe all of it. It was strange being acknowledged by the highest office in the country, and yet still feeling like a stranger among my own blood. As I walked to the bus stop, my phone buzzed. Dozens of messages poured in. Screenshots of the moment the Prime Minister hugged me were already trending on social media. One news outlet had captioned it, "From server to changemaker, the unsung hero of today's wedding." My inbox was full of job inquiries, invitations to speak, people who had previously ignored my emails now suddenly asking to collaborate. My old university sent a message asking if I'd consider being part of their alumni spotlight series. But none of that moved me quite like the voice memo from my younger sister, Alina. Her voice cracked with emotion. "I had no idea the Prime Minister knew you, or that you'd been working on all those projects. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder for you to be treated with respect today. I just wanted you there. I'm so proud of you. We all should be." I listened to that recording 3 times before I replied. I simply sent her a heart emoji and a voice note back. "You believed in me. That's all I needed." That night, I didn't sleep. My name kept popping up online. People I hadn't heard from in years were tagging me. Some cousins sent apology messages, clearly spurred by guilt or maybe embarrassment. My Aunt Nazia even left a voicemail. "Alina, Beta, what a surprise today. We're all so proud. Come by for brunch next week." I deleted it without replying. It wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. The kind of clarity that comes after years of rejection and invisibility. I no longer needed their validation. The Prime Minister's hug wasn't what proved my worth. The hundreds of villagers who now had basic health care access because of the clinic we built, that was my proof. My purpose had never left. I had just forgotten to see it through the noise. The next morning, I woke up to a new headline, "Unsung Public Health Leader Embraced by Prime Minister at Private Wedding." Below it was my face and a photo of me mid-hug with the PM. I didn't smile. But I didn't frown either, because finally I realized something I'd long suspected. Quiet resilience is louder than applause. The hours after the wedding were a blur of texts, social media tags, news alerts, and missed calls. When I had walked out of that reception hall, I was just trying to hold on to my dignity. But by the next morning, I was on the front page of 2 national news websites, and my name, Alina Yusuf, was trending for the first time in my life. Everyone wanted to know who the woman was that the Prime Minister hugged at the Khawaja Alvi wedding. The irony was rich. Just 24 hours earlier, I was being ignored, scoffed at, and ordered to carry mineral water to guests who didn't even acknowledge my existence. Now I was the headline. That morning, I turned on my phone and saw over 200 unread messages. My email inbox had requests for interviews. Public health organizations I had applied to years ago, only to be rejected, were suddenly interested in your expertise. Even my former university tagged me in a post calling me an inspiring example of alumni impact. But it wasn't the attention that overwhelmed me. It was the sudden change in how people treated me. My value hadn't changed overnight. Only their perception had. I kept thinking back to the expression on Amal's face, my cousin and the bride, when the Prime Minister said my name. Amal had grown up around privilege, always the favorite child in a family obsessed with appearances. She had never lifted a finger for community service, let alone real work. Yet she walked through life as if the world owed her celebration. I, on the other hand, had fought for everything. When our parents compared us, it was always the same line: Amal is graceful, Alina is hardworking. Grace was praised. Hard work was just expected. At the wedding, Amal had been too busy basking in the attention to care that I was even there, much less working. But when the Prime Minister stepped in and embraced me, she froze. I could tell from her eyes that she was trying to make sense of it. Why would he, the most powerful man in the country, hug me? I received a text from my younger sister that afternoon. Amal is furious. She says you hijacked her wedding. Even Auntie Parveen's trying to do damage control. Apparently, the wedding planner is offering a refund on the video shoot because it didn't go as expected. I didn't reply. Instead, I accepted an invitation to speak at a local university where I had once applied for a lecturing position and never heard back. Now they were asking if I could share a few words on resilience. I didn't care for the irony anymore. If they were finally willing to listen, I'd speak. The auditorium was small, and it smelled faintly of dust and floor polish. But the students, about 50 of them, were attentive. After my talk about public health, village outreach, and grassroots logistics, one student raised her hand and asked, "How do you stay motivated when no one seems to care about your work?" I paused, thinking back to the wedding. "You don't work so they'll care," I replied. "You work so that you won't forget who you are." The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was honest. Afterward, a professor approached me and said, "You were overlooked for far too long, Ms. Yusuf. That's going to change now." But change, I had learned, is rarely smooth. That evening, Amal posted a cryptic Instagram story, a photo of her in her wedding gown, eyes brimming with tears, with the caption, "Even your happiest day isn't safe from jealousy." It was a passive, aggressive strike clearly aimed at me. She couldn't call me out by name, not now when public sentiment was on my side, but the message was clear. I had ruined her day. I stayed quiet. I didn't want drama, but someone else didn't feel the same. That night, my cousin Zara, Amal's younger sister, called me. "Alina," she whispered, "I'm just calling to say I saw everything. I heard what people said before the PM walked in. I saw how they treated you. I'm sorry I didn't speak up. It wasn't right. I was touched." Zara had always been quiet, always stuck in Amal's shadow. "You don't owe me anything." I told her, "But I do." She insisted. "You helped build mobile clinics during the floods last year. My friend from university told me that the team saved her village from a cholera outbreak, and we treated you like a waitress in your own family's wedding. That's not just cruel, it's shameful." I didn't say much. I didn't need to. Sometimes silence says what words can't. The next day, I received an unexpected call from the Ministry of Health. A senior advisor wanted to discuss bringing me on as a consultant for their national vaccination strategy. "We saw the clip," he said casually, "but we've also been reviewing your work. It's impressive. You're not just field-trained, you're a leader." I thanked him, trying to stay composed. Within a week, my life began to shift. A health documentary crew wanted to film me at the clinic I had helped set up. A nonprofit offered me a grant to expand my rural outreach work. I was invited to 2 panels on global health equity. Suddenly, people who had never acknowledged my existence were tagging me, quoting me, trying to be in my orbit. But not everyone was clapping. At a family dinner, held weeks after the wedding to celebrate Amal and her new husband's return from their honeymoon, I attended out of obligation. I arrived quietly, wearing a simple outfit, and tried to stay out of the way. But the moment I walked in, all eyes turned toward me. My aunt, the self-bra, claimed queen of the family, raised an eyebrow and muttered, "The celebrity has arrived." I ignored her. Amal didn't speak to me that evening. Her husband, awkward but polite, did. "You must be proud of what you've accomplished," he said. I just smiled. "I'm proud of what I've endured." It was after dessert that everything erupted. One of the younger cousins, a curious 12-year-old, asked loudly, "Alina Apa, is it true you're meeting the Prime Minister again next week?" The table went quiet. Amal's fork clinked against her plate. "Why would she be meeting him?" she said, laughing. "She serves water, remember?" The jab hung in the air like smog, but this time I didn't stay silent. I looked directly at Amal. "Because he values service over show," I said. "Because in a world full of brides and centerpieces, someone still needs to carry the water." You could hear a pin drop. No one spoke for a moment. Then Zara claps. Lowly, then faster. The youngest cousins joined in. My uncle tried to hush them, but it was too late. The moment had already shifted. I didn't stay long after that. I left with dignity, something no one could take from me. Outside, as I stood beneath the stars, I realized something powerful. The world doesn't need more people obsessed with spotlight. It needs more people who shine even when no one's looking, and I would keep shining. Even if it meant carrying water, even if it meant walking into rooms I wasn't invited to, because now I knew my worth didn't need a seat at their table. The week that followed the wedding seemed to split my life into 2 parts, the one before the Prime Minister's hug and the one after. While my work, ethics, and years of sacrifice remained unchanged, the world suddenly noticed me like I had just been born. People who once ignored my emails now added heart emojis to their replies. Strangers on the street stopped me to say they'd seen the video. It was surreal, but underneath it all, I remained the same Alina who had built mobile clinics in the blistering heat, who had gone door-to-door during the polio drives, who had been laughed at, underestimated, and passed over by her own family. I hadn't planned to go viral. I'd only shown up that day to fulfill a simple request from Amal's mother, to help serve water and make sure guests were comfortable. In her words, "It'll be good to keep busy." I took no offense. I'd heard those words all my life, always suggesting that my place was in the background. But when the Prime Minister hugged me, the background became the spotlight, and no one was ready for what came next. My first major engagement after the wedding was a live panel discussion on national television about community health workers and their impact. I was nervous, not because I doubted my work, but because I feared being tokenized, used as a symbol rather than being seen for my substance. But when I entered the studio, the host greeted me with genuine warmth. "Alina, your work has spoken louder than 1,000 speeches," he said, adjusting his mic. "The country is finally ready to listen." During the broadcast, I spoke about the thousands of forgotten villages, the women who delivered babies on dirt floors, the children who survived not because of hospitals, but because of handwritten vaccine logs and determination. For the first time, my voice wasn't competing for space, it was commanding it. After the segment aired, the health minister's office called to confirm I'd be formally recognized during Health Heroes Week. But not everyone celebrated. At home, my family still walked on eggshells. My mother was proud but overwhelmed. "People keep calling and asking if I'm your mother," she said once, halfway between awe and worry. "Even your father started reading your articles." My father, always the quiet observer, surprised me the most. He called me to his room one evening, handed me a yellowing file with my school certificates, and said, "You were always going to be someone, Alina. I just didn't know the world would notice this way." I smiled, emotion caught in my throat. "It's not about the world noticing," I replied. "It's about not hiding anymore." That sentence echoed inside me days later when I received a formal invitation to the Prime Minister's residence. It wasn't just a courtesy call. He was hosting a dinner to honor health workers and wanted me there as the keynote guest. The moment I stepped into the residence, I felt the weight of every dismissal I'd ever received, every family dinner where my name was skipped, every wedding where I sat in the back row. But none of it mattered now, because tonight I wasn't just a guest. I was the story. The Prime Minister greeted me like an old friend. "You made quite an impression," he smiled. "But more importantly, your work has saved lives. We should have recognized you sooner." The evening was a whirlwind of speeches, photos, and heartfelt acknowledgments. I talked about sustainable health care systems, not in theory, but in practice. I used real names, people I had met, healed, and wept with. The room listened. After the dinner, I walked out onto the grand balcony. The city below glittered with possibility. I thought of Amal again, not out of bitterness, but as a symbol of how misplaced priorities can blind people. In that moment, I no longer saw myself as someone who had crashed her wedding. I had simply arrived. The next day, headlines read, "From water bearer to policy shaper, Alina Yousaf's rise shocks the nation." And that's when Amal called. I hesitated before answering. We hadn't spoken since the night of the wedding. Her tone was clipped but composed. "I just want to say." She started, then paused. "I didn't know everything you were doing. I thought you were just busy with charity work." "Not charity," I said calmly. "It's public health, it's infrastructure, it's the backbone of every functioning society." "I know that now," she whispered. "The way people talk about you. Even my in-laws are impressed." There it was again, impressed. As if I'd performed a magic trick, but I didn't rub it in. I simply said, "It's never been about impressing people, Amal. It's about doing what matters. You don't have to see the results to know the work is important." A long silence followed. "I wish I had known you better," she said finally. "You still can." I replied, not because I needed her approval, but because I was no longer interested in resentment. Growth, I'd learned, was more powerful than revenge. That week, I visited the village where I'd once organized a sanitation campaign that was almost canceled due to lack of funding. This time, I was greeted with banners, children with flowers, and a plaque that read, "To Alina Yousaf, our voice, our champion." Tears filled my eyes, not from pride, but from relief. They saw me, really saw me, not because someone famous hugged me, but because they had felt the impact of what I had done. Later that evening, as I was driving home, I got a voice message from the Prime Minister's secretary. "The PM wants to extend an offer. Would you be interested in leading a newly formed task force on rural health access?" I pulled over, sat in stunned silence, and listened again. It wasn't just a new chapter, it was a new book. Written by my hand, with ink made from every drop of water I had once served. And as I looked into the night sky, I smiled to myself. They had laughed at me when I carried the water. Now they drank from the well I helped build. The week after my meeting with the Prime Minister, my life shifted in ways I could have never predicted, even beyond the media frenzy. It was more than just sudden fame or headlines. It was as though the world around me had suddenly paused, rewound, and begun playing on a different frequency. One where my voice echoed louder, clearer, and finally with weight. Where people didn't just hear what I had to say, but listened like it mattered. I was invited onto university panels, into policy rooms, into communities that once brushed me aside. For the first time in my life, people who had once dismissed me as the girl who always volunteered too much or the family member who served water at weddings, were now sitting across from me, taking notes. And yet, in the middle of all this change, I found myself craving the ordinary, my morning routines, my quiet walks through the clinic hallways, the days when the only applause I heard was from mothers grateful that their children had been vaccinated. I didn't want to become just a viral sensation or the poster child of political correctness. I wanted to return to my roots, the purpose that had always driven me. And so, between media interviews and government roundtables, I carved out time to visit the rural clinics I helped build. I didn't announce my visits or bring a camera crew. I went as I always had, with sleeves rolled up and notepad in hand. In one village, an older woman ran toward me and hugged me so tightly, I nearly lost my breath. "My daughter's alive because of you," she whispered through tears. She didn't know about the Prime Minister or the wedding or the headlines. She only knew what I had left behind, a legacy of presence, of care, of action. Meanwhile, my family began shifting too. The tension at home had started to melt, little by little. My mother began referring to me in conversations as my daughter, the one who works with the Prime Minister now, which still made me cringe, but I understood it came from a place of pride she didn't know how to express otherwise. My father became quieter than usual, but in his silence there was something warmer. He'd listen when I spoke, look me in the eye longer. That was his version of growth. And then there was Amal. She started messaging me more. Not long essays of apology, but small gestures. A forwarded article with my name in it. A quick, "You handled that panel so well," after one of my interviews. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't want to rush forgiveness. I'd learned by now that healing doesn't arrive on demand. It arrives in time when honesty and empathy make space for it. But what I hadn't expected was the private message I received from her husband, Saad. I'd never really known him well. We'd only spoken briefly at events or family dinners. But the message read, "Hi, Alina. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened at the wedding. You didn't deserve to be treated that way. If it means anything, I was genuinely moved when you spoke. Thank you for showing up." That message struck a nerve I didn't know I still had exposed. It reminded me of how I had felt standing in that banquet hall, balancing a jug of water, overhearing laughter that wasn't just casual. It was dismissive, derisive, the kind that echoes in your ears long after the room goes quiet. I sat with his message for a while, then responded, "Thank you. It does mean something. I hope Amal's doing well. I hope we all are." It wasn't closure, but it was something close, a sign that even those who stood silently during your humiliation could later learn to speak up. A few days later, I received an invitation to attend a fundraising gala for national health initiatives. It was hosted by the President's Council for Rural Development, and they had chosen to honor a handful of contributors. My name was one of them. I was stunned, not because I didn't believe I deserved it, but because these rooms were usually reserved for legacy donors, bureaucrats, or ministers' children. Not people like me. Not the girl who used to collect plastic chairs after family weddings. I decided to go, this time not just as a health worker, but as someone who had earned her seat at the table. I wore a simple dress, one my sister Zara had helped me choose, and when I entered the grand ballroom, heads turned, but not in mockery, in recognition. I spotted several familiar faces from the Prime Minister's team, former professors, and even a couple of journalists. But one person stood out in the crowd, Amal. She was with her parents, likely invited because of her father's connections. Our eyes met across the room, and she made her way toward me slowly. "You look amazing," she said, nervously adjusting the shawl over her shoulder. "I wasn't sure if you'd speak to me." I tilted my head. Why wouldn't I? Because I was cruel, she whispered, because I laughed, because I called you a helper when you were the one who built half the medical map this country uses. You called me what you were taught to believe, I said gently. But now you know better. She nodded, swallowing hard. "I want to learn from you." That surprised me, but not because I thought it was impossible. Because I never thought she'd say it out loud. We didn't hug. We didn't pose for selfies, but we did stand there, two women from the same bloodline, finally seeing each other not through family roles or social filters, but as humans capable of change. The evening ended with me being called to the stage. I delivered a short speech, less about myself and more about the people we forget, the families living off dirt roads, the children who hold empty vaccine cards like report cards, the women who give birth in silence and pain, but still manage to smile when a visitor comes bearing paracetamol. We serve not because we are invisible. I said into the mic, voice steady. We serve because we believe presence is the most powerful form of leadership. There was a standing ovation. Later that night, I received a text from my father. I watched your speech twice. I cried the second time. I cried too, because I knew that for the first time my father didn't just respect me, he saw me. After the gala, I expected things to slow down. I craved quiet again, something normal, something grounding. I missed the dusty villages and the familiar rhythm of clinic visits, where I wasn't Alina Yusuf, the girl who went viral, but just Nurse Alina, someone you trusted with your baby's fever, or someone you called when the delivery pain started. Fame, even of the modest kind, had a strange weight to it. It followed you like a second skin, flattering sometimes, suffocating at others. But slowing down wasn't in the cards. That week, I got a call from the Ministry of Health asking if I'd serve as a policy advisor on a new rural health initiative. It wasn't just symbolic. They wanted someone who had both boots on the ground experience and the ability to represent the needs of communities that had long been neglected. I took the job, not because I needed a title, but because I finally had a seat at the table, and I wanted to make sure the voices I worked with for so long were carried into every policy meeting, every budget discussion, every reform. Each day started before dawn. I would read policy drafts during breakfast, then consult with district health officers by mid-morning. I organized video calls with local midwives, visited rural sanitation units in the afternoon, and drafted recommendations into the night. It was the hardest work I'd ever done, and the most fulfilling. For the first time, the system was listening, and even when it wasn't, I didn't stop pushing. But while my professional life reached heights I hadn't imagined, my personal life faced its own quiet trials. Fame had exposed me to admiration, but also envy. People began to treat me differently, not always kindly. Some relatives now spoke to me with rehearsed politeness, their eyes scanning for arrogance. Old friends who once laughed at my unpaid fieldwork now claimed I had changed. The irony wasn't lost on me. I hadn't changed. I had simply stopped apologizing for who I was. Then, unexpectedly, came a moment I'd been dreading and longing for in equal measure, a family gathering. It was my uncle's retirement party, something big with all the cousins invited. I debated attending. Part of me still remembered the sting of Amal's wedding, the whispers, the glances, the derision. But a stronger part of me knew I wasn't that version of myself anymore. I wasn't returning to beg for approval. I was walking in as the same woman I had always been, just more visible now. I arrived in a modest blue shawl, wore camis, my hair pulled back in a simple braid. I didn't wear makeup or fancy shoes. I didn't want them to see the viral sensation. I wanted them to see Alina. And when I walked into the banquet hall, something shifted, heads turned, not out of mockery, not to whisper, but in acknowledgement. Some nodded. A few offered hesitant smiles, and then Amal approached. She looked different, calmer, softer. "I saved you a seat," she said quietly, next to me. I smiled, thanks. The evening passed gently. We laughed at old stories, exchanged updates. No one brought up the wedding. No one needed to. The silence between us had already been stitched closed with time, humility, and growth. When it was my turn to say a few words about my uncle's career, he had been a teacher for 40 years. I kept it simple. He taught generations of children, and in doing so, he reminded us that education isn't about textbooks. It's about showing up, just like health, just like love. After the applause, as I stepped down from the small podium, I caught my father's eye. He was smiling, that quiet, rare smile of his, the one that only came out when words fell short. Later that night, as I was leaving, my mother handed me a small, fabric-wrapped bundle. "It's from your grandmother's trunk," she said. "She would have wanted you to have it." Inside was an old notebook filled with Urdu poetry, my grandmother's own writings. At the end, in faded ink, was a note, "For the granddaughter who dares to dream louder than the rest." I cried in the car. Not for the recognition, but for all the years I thought being different meant being less. In the months that followed, my policy work grew into something far-reaching. We piloted mobile clinics that reached over 300 new villages. We created a telehealth model for pregnant women in remote regions. We funded scholarships for midwives, expanded maternal nutrition programs, and digitized vaccination records. And every week, I still visited clinics. Still held babies, still sat beside grieving mothers. I hadn't forgotten who I was. I had only become more of her. One evening, I was invited back to the wedding hall where Amal's reception had been held. This time, it was for an awards ceremony for public servants. The irony wasn't lost on me. I stepped into the same hallway where I had once been laughed at while pouring water. But now the banner read, "Honoring the nation's pillars, public servants who shaped the future." When they called my name, I walked past the same golden chairs, the same carpeted aisles, and stood on the same stage that once ignored me. This time, no one looked away. As I accepted the award, I paused, looked directly at the audience, and said, "Years ago, I served water at a wedding in this very hall. I wasn't on the guest list, I didn't have a title, but I had one thing, purpose, and purpose doesn't need permission." The room erupted in applause. After the ceremony, a girl approached me, maybe 19, dressed modestly, eyes wide with something between awe and desperation. "I want to be like you," she said, "but everyone tells me I'm wasting my time in nursing school." I held her gaze. "You're not wasting anything. You're planting seeds. One day people will drink from the well you dug with your own hands." She smiled. Small at first, then with relief. She needed to hear it, and I needed to say it. Later that night, I stood alone under the stars, no cameras, no microphones, just me, and I whispered into the wind. They laughed when I poured water, but now they see the well. And somewhere in the echo of that silence, I knew that was always enough. The moment I walked out of that hall, my award clutched gently in my hands, I realized something deeper than the applause or the recognition. Sometimes, the path to respect isn't paved with grandeur or titles, but with quiet resilience. They laughed when I poured water, not realizing that the same hands could one day build clinics, draft national health policies, and shake hands with world leaders. They saw a servant. I saw a beginning. That night, as I sat in my small apartment, still wearing the simple kurta I had worn to the award ceremony, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like someone who had simply refused to be defined by a single moment of humiliation. The journey from being laughed at in a wedding hall to standing beside the Prime Minister wasn't a miracle. It was a series of deliberate, painful, consistent choices. It was nights spent studying when others slept. It was saying yes to underpaid fieldwork while others chased prestige. It was doing the job no one wanted, quietly, thoroughly, humbly. I thought back to Amal, my cousin, once ashamed of me. I thought about how she had changed too. Not just in how she treated me, but in how she treated herself. She started volunteering after her wedding, working with orphan children, finding purpose outside appearances. Her apology didn't erase the sting of the past, but it did soften it. We don't have to become best friends, but we respect each other now, and maybe that's enough. And then I thought of the girl who came up to me after the ceremony, the one who still doubted her place. She reminded me of myself. Every time someone like her rises, it's a ripple, a quiet revolution. That is why I still visit local health units. That is why I still write policy recommendations with the same urgency I once used to chase ambulances on muddy roads. Not for medals, but for women like her, women like me. I don't resent the ones who mocked me anymore, not because they didn't hurt me, They did, but because I refused to let them decide who I was, their laughter was loud. But my purpose was louder. Now, when I'm introduced at conferences or televised panels, I don't ask them to list my credentials. I just say, former water server, current nation builder, and it always gets a pause, then a smile. Because people remember humility. People remember when the underdog doesn't just rise, but rises without bitterness. Life may not always give you a seat at the table. Sometimes you have to bring your own chair. Or better yet, stand, serve, and build the table yourself. Because eventually the world takes notice, not of who sat quietly, but of who stood anyway. So to the girls still hiding in the shadows of someone else's pride, come out, the world may laugh at first, but one day they'll stand and they'll call your name, maybe even hug you, like they did me.